There's a storm coming. That means any minute now, my grandchildren will start arriving. The littlest ones first, all of them scrambling for the shelter of Grandma's lap. But the older ones won't be far behind. Oh, they'll say they're just checking on their younger siblings. But I know the real reason they're there. They know their grandmother isn't afraid of any storm. And then one of them is sure to ask to hear it again, the story of the great storm, how God needed to cleanse his world of evil, how he decided to send the rain, and how he asked Grandpa Noah to build a boat. Oh, my husband was an intelligent man, but human genius could never have devised such a structure. 3 stories tall, designed to let in light from above, and all the various apartments arranged to take advantage of that light. Oh, they'll listen intently as I tell them how every day we gathered supplies, built up stores of food, prepared the timbers, and every night I collapsed on my mat with sawdust in my hair and blisters on my palms, the smell of pitch forever in my nostrils. They'll sit, their eyes as big as moons, when I get to the part about the animals. How in perfect order they walked and hopped and lumbered and skittered their way into the safety of that vessel. And they'll barely breathe when I get to describing that storm. Oh, it didn't just rain. The very windows of heaven opened. The earth itself cracked apart, releasing massive jets of water. Oh, they think their grandmother is so brave. She survived the great storm. But no matter how many times I tell them, they still don't understand. You see, the great storm, the boat, the flood, the rain, that wasn't the real storm at all. The real storm began long before the first drop of rain. I was sitting in my kitchen that day when Noah found me. I know, most men couldn't find their own kitchen. But many times I would look up and he would be standing there holding some little prize from his garden, a fat cucumber, the first ripe melon. And he would tell me I didn't have to share. It was a gift just for me. Other women get jewelry, I got vegetables. But I didn't mind. He was a good man, a kind man. Shall I tell you a secret? I hadn't wanted to marry him. It's true. He was old, older even than my father. And in my girlish fantasies, I thought I deserved something better. And why not? I had a generous dowry, and I was considered to be quite a beauty. Well, you're just going to have to take my word for that. But I had already had several offers. The first when I was still just a girl from a wealthy family offering days of ease. But the parents were too pushy, and the groom was known to be slow-witted. And my father refused. And kept on refusing until Noah. He told me Noah was a good manager, a good friend, but more important, a good man. He said he was the kind of man who would always make me feel safe, the kind it would not be difficult to learn to love. And now that good man was standing once more in my kitchen, but he held no little gift in his hands. I knew immediately something was wrong. I thought it might be one of our boys. these years, and I can still remember, I had been crushing fragrant bay leaves for his favorite stew. All these years, and I still can't abide the smell of bay. The man was talking nonsense. God was going to destroy his creation, wipe man from the face of the earth, and the words he was using, rain, flood. In the world I knew, the laws of nature were fixed. The earth had always been watered by mist and by dew, and no river yet had ever overrun its boundaries. So how could there be water from the sky? Water enough to cover the hills. Surely he had misunderstood. Or perhaps his years were beginning to affect his reasoning. Yes, that had to be it. What other explanation could there be? On that day, I could more easily believe that my husband was losing his mind than that I was about to lose my whole world. You see, in those days before, the earth barely showed the curse of sin. It hadn't greatly changed the face of nature. The earth was still rich and beautiful with majestic trees and vast garden-like plains, scented with the air of 1,000 flowers. It's what I miss most. What makes it hardest now, knowing it will never look the same. My grandchildren think this is beauty. They call these jagged peaks, these rocks jutting up from the dirt, this is beauty. I suppose it's easy enough to imagine you live in paradise when you have nothing to compare it to. But I remember when nature barely showed the face of sin. Oh, it was there. It was plainly visible, but to see it, you only had to look at man. Only a few generations had passed since Adam had access to the tree of life, and men still retained much of that early vigor. Their existence measured in centuries. Men were blessed with unimaginable wisdom and talent, but they turned those blessings into a curse by focusing on the gifts, not the giver. They gloried in their own human genius, adored nature in place of the God of nature, lived for pleasure, for satisfying every desire and satisfying it now. There was no respect for marriage, for property rights, least of all for human life. If a man wanted something, he took it, whether by force or by cunning, it hardly mattered. It's just the way things were. Sin became so general, so common. It seemed less and less like sin, until at last they put God out of their knowledge entirely. They didn't need him. They convinced themselves those stories had been fables, taught their children that he didn't even exist, and then taught them to bow down and worship small gods they had made with their own hands. It is a law of the human mind that by beholding, we become changed. If the mind is never lifted above the level of humanity, if it never rises to contemplate God, the man will sink lower and lower, and it is astonishing how fast the world declined. It was still in its infancy, really. And yet my husband was telling me that evil had become so deep and so widespread that God couldn't tolerate it anymore. I had always known that someday God's mercy would run out, that someday he would put an end to man's wickedness. But why did it have to be today? Why did it have to be my husband? Weren't we different enough already? I sat for a long time there in my kitchen. A long time. If Noah really started building that boat, if he told people what he was doing, what God was going to do, and I knew he would, I knew nothing was ever going to be the same. And I was so afraid. God, forgive me, I thought about leaving him, just taking the boys and leaving. I knew no one would fault me. But underneath, as much as I wanted to believe he was wrong, underneath, I knew my husband, and I knew God, and I believed. Noah invested everything we had to get started with the work, and his family, his father and uncles, all godly men, they helped. Grandfather Methuselah was so eager he practically moved in with us. But there were others too. Some not bold enough to work directly with us, but who provided for our needs, who paid for skilled craftsmen, who with a nod would silently let us know that they were with us. Oh, such a blessing each and every one of them were, for truly, I don't know if I would have had the courage to go on if we had been alone from the beginning. As we began to construct that immense craft on dry land, people came from everywhere to see the bizarre sight, and it was bizarre. Oh, they came just out of curiosity, to be entertained. But Noah used that opportunity to warn them what was to come, to urge them to change their ways and be saved. To most, he was a joke, someone new to laugh at. Others were afraid at first, but as time went on and there was no sign of any catastrophe, they began to feel reassured and went back to doing exactly as they had done before. Others were deeply convicted. I could see it in their eyes. But there were so many ridiculing and joking. What would their friends and family think if they knew they believed that old man? They couldn't risk it. And instead of letting their faith grow, they resisted the Spirit. And in the end, many of them became among the most defiant scoffers. For very often, those who have had light once do the most damage later. Day after day, my husband was denounced as a fool, a fanatic, a liar. Do you know who were the worst? Ones who had always professed to be followers of God, but who had never committed to truly knowing him or his requirements. They soothed the people, telling them, "Don't be alarmed. Noah is confused. He doesn't understand that God is love, only love, and that love goes against his character to destroy his creation." And so it went. One day I had gone to take Noah his midday meal, and just as I arrived, a swaggering young man, a boy really, was hurling insults, entertaining his friends. And just as I arrived, he turned and spit at Noah's feet. Spit at him. I was so angry, I marched over to him and grabbed him by his ear and said, "You dare to spit at my husband, God's messenger. Who are you to do such a thing, a toad-faced weasel with the brains of a cabbage?" Oh, that God would strike you down this very hour. Why should I have to wait for a flood to do it? After that, Noah said I didn't need to bring him his lunch anymore. Through it all, he stood like a rock. His connection to God gave him an integrity, a power. Why couldn't they see it? Why hadn't I seen it? I used to watch him sometimes and wonder if I ever really loved him before now. How could I ever have thought of leaving him? And sometimes, just often enough to bring us comfort, to give hope, a truly penitent soul would find the courage to step out from that mob and join us. But over the years, as the opposition became more and more hateful, more savage, some of those dear people were brutally cut down. And others, God in his mercy simply laid to rest, sparing them the final test. Until by the end, there were only 8 of us left. Grandfather Methuselah, oh, that precious man, he had died just the year before. He kept us going for so long, kept me going, never wavering, never tiring. That old man could outwork us all. 969 years old, and Noah had to order him to stay off the scaffolding. I think he was disappointed when he realized that he wasn't going to be around to see God's terrible tempest. He would have enjoyed the ride. I think in some ways, his death was the hardest of all. I had already lost so much, and then to lose him. But it was a blessing, surely, for him, for it would have been too difficult. Not only the storm itself, but this life we have now. But it was a blessing for me as well, for I found that the more I lost, the more I longed for God. And then one day, it was done. After 120 years, the ark was finally finished. With almost an agony of desire, Noah pled with those people one last time to seek refuge while it could still be found, but they wouldn't listen. And then there was a sound like a rushing wind, and birds were flocking to us from every direction. Beasts were coming from the hills and from the fields, with no man leading them or urging them from behind. And for once, that crowd was stunned into silence. They were terrified, speechless, but only momentarily. One of them shouted, "It's a trick! Noah has pulled an illusion!" And they all began to snicker, and then a ripple of laughter went over them. And I thought, dumb animals are obeying the voice of their God. And those stubborn people are banishing their fears by laughing and drinking and mocking all the louder, even as the massive doors of the ark began to swing into place. We were shut in, and the people who had rejected God's mercy were shut out. For 7 days, nothing happened. We hauled buckets of water and armloads of food to every creature. We prayed and sang, and waited. For 7 days, the crowd outside was triumphant. Noah's message was obviously a delusion. No flood was ever going to come. And for 7 days, I fought down the fear that they just might be right. But on the 8th day, dark clouds began to gather, and large drops of rain began to fall, coming faster and faster until water was falling from the sky in endless sheets. I could hear it pounding on the roof, could hear the wind howling, could hear the animals, ropes creaking and snapping. But above all of that, above even that, I could hear something else. I could hear them. I could hear them. People who had been my neighbors, my friends. I could hear them screaming and shrieking and begging, pounding on a door that I couldn't open if I had wanted. And I thought, oh, God, what if someone is still out there because of me? What if someone is still out there because I never told them? Because I didn't know what to say or how to say it, so I left it all up to Noah because he was so much better. What if someone was still out there because I didn't invite them? After that, I don't think I even noticed the storm. After all we had been through, what were a few waves, a little rain, we knew that God would preserve his servants. And even through our tears, we were praising him. Another storm is coming. One day soon, God will again sweep his world clean, and sin and sinners will be no more. And once again, God, in his grace, will preserve his people. Even now, he is sending out his warnings. I know you have heard his sweet voice of mercy pleading for you to come to him and to bring someone else with you. Oh, my friends, when the next storm comes, will you be found in the ark of his protection?